Hey, AP Calculus, this is the second part of a video on transformations of trig functions. We're going to look at a couple of examples as to how we can identify each part of our graphs given just the function. We're not going to graph right away, but I will be showing you in a file on our Google Classroom what the graphs look like after they've been transformed. Okay, so for this first example, it says, for these problems, it says state the period and amplitude of each function and describe any horizontal or vertical shifts. Once again, we're not going to sketch the graphs, but I'm going to show you what those graphs look like when they're transformed. Okay, so really all we're doing is just the first part here. I'm going to scratch out this guy so that way you don't get confused as to what we're doing here. Okay, so the period and amplitude. So for the first example, we have y equals 2 times cosine x. Okay, just on the graph alone, or the function alone, we have a coefficient of 2. That's our amplitude. So our a value, the amplitude is going to be 2, and there's nothing else other than cosine of x. So that means our period is going to be just 2 pi. Okay, so we have to go 6.28 down the line to get to one full cycle of our graph for cosine here. Okay, for the next example, we have y equals sine of 3x. Okay, once again, no coefficient on the sine. That means our amplitude is going to be just 1. And then our period, because there's a coefficient on the 3, here's what changes about that. So our period, once again, we take that coefficient in front of the x and we divide 2 pi by that number. So 2 pi over 3 is going to be our period. So to get from 0, 0 to 2 pi over 3, that gives me one cycle of the sine graph. Okay. For the next one, y equals 3 times sine of x minus 1. Okay. So for this one, once again, we have a coefficient in front of my sine. That means my amplitude changes. It's going to change to 3 because we look at the absolute value. No coefficient on the x, so my period's still going to be 2 pi. Now we have something different here. We have a minus 1 here. And because that minus 1 is not inside the parentheses with the x, that's what we call a vertical shift. So my vertical shift is going to be, I'm sorry, not up 1, minus 1. It's going to be down 1. So I should change this direction on my arrow here. So down 1. Okay. So for part D, we have something a little bit more complicated. We have y equals the opposite of cosine of 2 times x plus pi over 2. A lot going on here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Let's break this one down here. First of all, once again, we have a coefficient here. It's negative. So the absolute value of negative 1 is going to be just 1. But we also want to keep in mind here too, because it's negative, that means that we're actually flipping this graph, reflecting this graph over the x-axis. Okay, so the amplitude is 1, but we reflect or flip over the x-axis. Okay, the next thing is the 2 in front of the parentheses there. That's going to be our b value. So that means our period for this graph is going to be 2 pi divided by 2, which in this case the 2's cancel. We're left with just pi. So we have to go a distance of 3.14159, if you want to get that precise, to the right or to the left from any point we pick, and that'll show us where that cycle repeats. The last part we want to look at is this plus pi over 2. That's our phase shift, our horizontal shift. Okay, so we take the opposite number of that, the opposite sign of that, so our horizontal shift is going to be to the left, because we always think of it as the opposite sign here. So plus means to the right, or normally we think of positive numbers to the right. In this case, because it's minus, it means we have to go to the left, and that would be left pi over 2. Okay, a lot going on there, obviously, but that's how we would break it down. For part E, y equals cosine of pi times x divided by 2. Okay, So no coefficient on the cosine. That means that our amplitude is just plain old 1. It's not negative either because there's no negative sign there. So we can just leave it as 1. There's no reflection. There is no coefficient outside the parentheses, so our period is going to stay, or our period is going to change here. I apologize. Our period, here's how we find this. Technically, our period is going to be whatever we multiply x by. So we want to change it so that way we have 2 pi divided by pi over 2. Now here's how we simplify this. We're going to take out the pi's, which basically leaves us with 2 divided by 1/2, which then that's going to simplify to 4. So the nice thing about a graph like this is that we have to go to the right or left 4 places, or a distance of 4, to restart our cycle for our graph. No horizontal shift because we're not adding or subtracting anything to the x inside the function, and there's no vertical shift because we're not adding anything outside of the function. So this is all we know about this. Our amplitude and our period changes based on this. Part F, just like we saw in Part D, a lot going on here. Let's go ahead and decipher all of this. Y equals 3 times sine of 1/4 times x minus pi, all plus 2. Okay, so let's start with our amplitude. Once again, the amplitude is the coefficient on the sine function. That's going to give me a value of 3. Our b value is 1/4. So to find our period, that's going to be 2 pi divided by 1/4, which once again, because we're dividing by a function, we're going to multiply the numerator by 4. So that's going to give me a period of 8 pi. Okay, so now we look inside the parentheses there. We have x minus pi. That means that we're going to have a horizontal shift of, because this is negative pi or x minus pi, it's going to be to the right pi or 3.14. And then we're going to have a vertical shift of 2. And in this case, because it's plus 2, it's going to be up 2. All right, and for g, I'm going to use a different color here. So that way I can distinguish between f and g here. For g, we have y equals cosine of 3x minus pi plus 1. All right. So once again, we answer what is our amplitude. That's the number in front of my cosine. So my amplitude, there we go, is going to be 4. All right. Now, take a look here. This one's a little bit different because we have a coefficient in front of x, but we're also having the phase shift here. Whenever this happens, remember, in order for it to work, we need to have a coefficient outside of parentheses and then x. So I'm going to simplify this. I want to have it look like all the other functions we've seen, such as right here, where we have a number in front of parentheses. Same thing right here. We have a number in front of parentheses. It's easy to identify what b is. B is kind of obscured here because we don't have a coefficient in front of parentheses here. We just have an expression inside of our function. So in order to do that, I'm going to try to factor out a 3, so to say, from this expression. And the way that we do that is we put 3 on the outside of parentheses. That takes care of x. And because pi is one of those numbers that we really can't define specifically, it's an irrational number, I'm just going to say minus pi over 3. That makes this a whole lot easier to look at because now my b value to find my period is going to be this number 3, or 2 pi divided by that number 3. So my period for part G is going to be 2 pi over 3. And we can also identify what my phase shift is. So my vertical shift, or my horizontal shift for this one, I'm going to erase this bottom line here so we have some more room. My vertical shift, or I'm sorry, my horizontal shift, because of that pi minus 3, is going to give me, that's it, because it's minus, that means we're going to go to the right by pi over 3. And then my vertical shift is just 1. and it's going to be, because it's plus 1, it's up 1. Okay. All right, guys. A lot to go through here, but once again, just make sure if you have questions, you ask them, you get to me as soon as you possibly can, so that way I know if there's any questions you have. Your homework for tonight is to do these two problems right here, and then you also will have a little bit of work on delta math, okay? So make sure you're doing these two plus the work that's out on delta math. If you have questions, please contact me, email, remind, messenger pigeon, whatever you want to use, but I'll be here for you guys if you ever need any help. Hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.